Welcome everyone to part 7 and the final part of this Sci-Fi Security Drone Blender tutorial series. So this is the last part, and in this part we're going to be doing the animation, we're going to be rendering out the frames, and then compiling them in Blender's video editor, and then we'll also add some sound effects to the animation to make it look really nice. If you've been enjoying this tutorial series and you'd like to help support me and this channel, then I will have links in the description to my Gumroad and my Patreon and the YouTube memberships. Those are all great ways to help support this channel, and all of your support really does make these tutorials possible. And you can also purchase the finished tutorial files on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. I'll have the links in the description. Now, if you're a beginner to animation in Blender and you'd like to learn the basics of animation, then I do have an animation for beginners tutorial. I'll have a link in the description to that tutorial if you'd like to check it out. So before we start doing the animation, I want to hide some of these objects like the buildings and the lights just so that they're out of the way. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and go back to solid view. And I'm in full screen mode, so I can just press Control Spacebar to go out of full screen mode. Alright, so what I want to do is just select all these other objects. So just hold down the Shift key, we're going to select the camera and all of the lights, and also hold down the Shift key and select these three objects in the background. So I'm going to move all these objects to the lights and camera collection. So I'm going to press the M key, and then I can click on lights and camera. And then to hide the lights and camera, I can just click on the check mark there to uncheck it. And so now we just have the robot in our view. But also if I press the 0 on the numpad, we're still going to be able to go inside the camera even though the camera is hidden. Now in the previous part of the tutorial series, I added in some keyframes here on the rotor blades. So I'm going to select the rotor blade object and then hold down the Shift key and select the other rotor blade. And then if you zoom in here, in the timeline, you can see there are some little yellow diamonds. And those are the keyframes. So press the A key in the timeline to make sure the keyframes are selected. They are selected if they are yellow. I can press X and then I can click on delete keyframe. And then I want to move the drone back to its default position. So press the A key to select everything, and I can press Alt R and Alt G and Alt S to clear the transforms. Now right here on the timeline on the end frame, I'm going to set this to 300 because I want my animation to have 300 frames. And also I am using the default frame rate of 24 frames per second. If you go here to the output properties, you can see the frame rate on default is set to 24, and that is very standard for animations, so I'll just leave it at 24 frames per second. Alright, so we're going to start by just blocking out the main poses of the drone, and we're going to block out the poses along the timeline. And then after that, we'll go in and we'll add more details and animate more parts. So I'm just going to select the main body object, and then I want to move it farther away and kind of move it outside of the camera view. So if I press the 0 on the numpad, that's going to go in and out of the camera view. I can now press G to grab, and I'm going to bring this back on the Y-axis and make it pretty far back. Something like that, and then press G to grab and move it up here. Now while I'm animating this, I want Blender to automatically add the keyframes because it'll speed up the animation and make it much easier. So I'm going to click on this button right here. This is the auto key, and so this way whenever I move an object or rotate or scale an object, it's automatically going to add a keyframe at that location on the timeline. So I'm now going to hit R to rotate, and then I will hit Z to rotate it on the Z axis, and I'm just going to move the robot over and just place it right about there. And then also right here you can see there is an empty object, and we use this for the depth of field, but I instead am just going to use like the eye object for the depth of field, so I can just delete this object. So I'm going to press 7 on the numpad to go to top view. I can kind of zoom out here, and you can see that the background images is turned on, so I can see the background images. I don't want to be able to see that, so I'm going to click on the check mark to uncheck that. And then I just want to see where the camera is, so I'm just going to turn on the lights and camera collection, and I can see that here's the camera, and then also the drone there is kind of going through the building. So what I'm going to do is select the body object and kind of move it back, kind of rotate it over, so something like that. And then also press the 0 on the numpad to go to the camera, and maybe I'll bring the drone forward a bit. Alright, that is pretty good, so I'll press 7 on the numpad for top view, and now I can just click on this to hide the lights and camera collection. You can see as I'm moving this around, we were on frame 0, and so I added a keyframe there on frame 0. Now I also want the drone to be rotated forward a little bit because he's going to be moving forward. So I'm going to press R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate this on the X-axis, but I want to rotate it on the local X and not the global X. So hit R to rotate, and then double tap the X key, and that way it's going to rotate it on the local X, so the object's X-axis. And just bring the robot forward a bit, so kind of rotate him over, something like that. Alright, and that is good for the first pose. So I'm now going to move the timeline over to frame 40. And at frame 40, the drone's going to be rotating and kind of flying in. Now, while I'm animating this, I want to be able to see the grid because it's kind of hard to actually see how far away things are. So if you click right up here on the overlays, I'm just going to turn on the floor and then turn on the axes X and Y. So this way, when I move around the scene, I can actually kind of see where the center of the scene is better. So I'm now going to press 7 on the numpad for top view, and I'm going to go to frame 40. And I'm going to rotate the drone and bring him over into the scene, kind of put him in the center there. And I could also go down here to the front view, and I want to rotate the drone sideways, kind of double tap the R key to do the trackball rotation, because the drone's going to start out here and kind of rotate over it, kind of rotate to the side. So now I can scrub back and forth here, and you can see the drone's rotating over. Now to make this a bit easier, I'm actually going to change the animation to linear. So with your mouse hovered over the timeline, you can press the T button, and then you can go right here and change it to linear. And so this way, there isn't going to be any speeding up or slowing down of the keyframes. It's just going to go from one keyframe to the next keyframe at a consistent speed. And so this will make it a bit easier just to block out the poses, and then once we're done blocking out the poses, we can make it smoother by changing it back to the BZA keyframe interpolation. But for now, we're going to use the linear. Let's head back to frame 40, and I'm going to press 0 on the numpad, and that's pretty good, although I do think I want to bring it forward a bit or more to the side. So I'll press G to grab, bring that a bit forward, something like that. So I'm now going to move the timeline to frame 70. So go to frame 70, and I'll press 7 for top view, and I'm going to bring this forward like that. And go into the camera view, see how that is. I need to bring it down more, so I'll press G to grab, bring it down on the Z axis right there. And then I want to rotate it on the Y axis to kind of rotate the drone back up and maybe bring him down just a little bit. Now, because the drone is stopping right here, he's going to kind of rotate forward. So I'm going to go to the side here, and I can just press R to rotate and kind of rotate the drone up a little bit. So then as he comes forward, he kind of rotates up a little bit, kind of like he's slowing down, so he's kind of pulling back a bit. So I'm now going to bring the timeline over to frame 90. So at frame 90, I want his rotation to be kind of at the default. So with the body selected, I can press Alt R. That's going to clear the rotation. And then I want him to kind of come up a little bit. So I'm going to press G to grab, just kind of move him up a little bit, just like that. So now he kind of flies in, he kind of stops, and then he'll just kind of rotate up a little bit and kind of fly up a little. So I'm now going to move the timeline over to frame 110. And at frame 110, I want the drone to be kind of rotated over, kind of looking over. So I'm going to press 7 on the numpad for top view. Let's actually go into the camera view, see how that's looking. Yeah, that's good. So I want to rotate the drone over at frame 110, just so that the drone is looking over to the side. And go into the camera view, maybe even bring this down a little bit and rotate it back a little bit. So something like that. Now it kind of comes up and then rotates over. Let's press Ctrl S to save the Blender file. So I'm now going to go to frame 145, and I just want to rotate the drone a bit farther and kind of rotate him back a little bit and then bring him up a little bit. So he's just kind of hovering and kind of looking around. And then I'm going to go to frame 170, and at frame 170, I want to rotate it a bit more on the Z axis like that, and maybe also double tap the R key to do the trackball rotation and kind of rotate him over like that. All right, so now he's just kind of floating there, kind of looking around, but he's not moving too much. So then right here, this is where I want him to like detect an intruder or something, and his lights go from being blue to being red. So at this part, he's gonna quickly swivel around and look over here. So I'm gonna drag the timeline to frame 185. And then I'm gonna rotate this on the Z axis, kind of rotate that over, kind of halfway, and then also rotate this over to the side and kind of rotate it down a bit. So something like that. So he's kind of rotating over quickly. So he kind of quickly turns, and he's kind of leaning over to the side because he is rotating over. So I'm now going to go to frame 200. At frame 200, I want him to be looking that way. So I'm going to rotate this on the Z axis, rotate that over. Also double tap the R key and kind of rotate that back, and rotate it up a little bit. And you don't need to do this in the camera view. You could just rotate this, kind of rotate that up, and maybe also bring the robot over a little bit. All right, let's go into the camera view, see how that's looking. I think I will bring the robot back and also rotate it on the Z-axis a bit. And then you can press the space bar if you want to play the timeline. You can see the robot's looking over and then quickly looks over. So I'm now going to go over to frame 230. And at this frame, the robot is actually going to be shooting the blasters. So I'm going to go over here to the side, and when he shoots the blasters, the force of it is going to have kind of a kickback, and so the drone's going to move back. So I'll press G to grab, move this back, and kind of rotate it over a little bit. Something like that. And then I also want to move the guns. So I'm going to click on this one, shift click on this one. And we haven't actually added any keyframes to the blasters yet. So what I'm going to do is go over here to frame 210. And then I can just press R to rotate and rotate it up just a little bit and then place it there. And then I'm going to go back to frame 230, and I'm going to rotate the guns down a little bit, just like that, kind of rotate them down, because there's going to be kind of a kickback as the robot shoots. And then I'm also going to move 3 frames back to frame 227. And at frame 227, that's when he's going to start to shoot. So I actually want to rotate the guns back up, so I'll rotate this over like that, make sure that looks good, rotate it over a little bit, so the robot's guns isn't really moving at all, and then there's that quick kickback right there when he shoots. And also at frame 227, I'm going to select the body and rotate it up a little bit and move it forward a little bit. So that way, when he shoots, he kind of quickly moves back. So you can see from 227 to 230, he quickly gets pushed back. So I'm now going to move over to frame 250. So at frame 250, he's just going to kind of slow down, but he still is going to be moving back a little bit. So I'll press G to grab, move that back a little bit. And also the guns, I just want them to go back to their default position. So I'm going to select this gun, shift select this gun, and I can press Alt R to clear the rotation values. And I added a keyframe there. So now if I go back here and play this, you can see he kind of shoots and then he just kind of moves back. So that is what I want. And I think I will select the body object and rotate that up a little bit. Go into the camera view, make sure that's looking okay. So he kind of shoots and then moves back. And we can animate the camera to kind of look at the robot as the animation is playing. So it's okay that kind of the side of the robot is going out of the camera view just a little. Let's press Ctrl S again to save. So now let's move to frame 270. And at frame 270, he's going to start to fly up. So go over here to the side view, press G to grab, move him up, and then we can also press R to rotate, and then double tap the X key to rotate it on the local X and kind of rotate the drone over so that he's flying up. And then also select the gun, hold down the shift key, select the other gun. I'm going to go here to the side view and just kind of rotate the guns down as if like he's flying, and so the guns are just kind of falling into the back. So if I go back and forth here, you can see as he goes up, those guns just kind of rotate down because he's moving up. So the force of it is kind of pulling the guns down a bit. Let's go into the camera view, see how that's looking. So I actually want to select the body object, make sure I'm on frame 270. And I want to move it down a little bit and then also move the drone back a little bit. So something like that. That is better. So I'm now going to go all the way over to frame 300, and at frame 300, he's just going to be flying up here. So I'll press G to grab, just kind of bring him up here and also bring him over a bit to the side. So now if I play through this or if I scrub through this, you can see he just kind of flies up there. And also I want him to move a bit faster at frame 300. So I'm going to press G to grab and move him a bit higher up. All right, so now I can press 0 to go into the camera view and let's play this. So that is pretty good. So I'm just going to play through the whole thing, just watch it. So he flies in, he kind of flies up, looks around. There's a little bit of time as he looks around, then he detects something and he shoots and then just flies away. So that is pretty good. So those are the base keyframes for the animation. So I can now go back here and add more details on those keyframes. So I'm going to start by scrubbing over to frame 40. And at frame 40, I'm going to press the period on the numpad to kind of zoom into the robot. Now, because he's rotated over to the side, I also want to rotate the fans over. So I'm going to select this circle right here, rotate that over a bit, select this one here and rotate that over a bit. Then I'm going to scrub back to frame 0 and I'm going to press period on the numpad to zoom into it. And I want to rotate this back. I can also press Alt R, that'll just clear the rotation. Select this one here and press Alt R to clear the rotation. So now as the drone flies, it kind of rotates over to the side. And that makes sense because if he's kind of rotating over, then these things are going to need to rotate so that it can shoot the air down this way. So it kind of pushes the robot over to the side. Now also he is moving forward, and so I want the blades to be rotated a bit more forward. So it's pushing the air more behind him. So I'm just going to select this object here, and then I can rotate this forward a bit. And I'm doing this on frame 40, and I can select this right here and also rotate this a bit forward, something like that. So I'm now going to click back here on the body object, and I need to go to frame 70, which is the next base keyframe. And at frame 70, I want to rotate the blades back. So I'm going to select this object, press Alt R, select this object, and press Alt R. And then also I want to select this object here, and I want to rotate it back a bit so that he's kind of pushing the air in front of him, so he kind of moves back and then eventually stops, and select this part here, select this object, and rotate it over. And then I also want to animate the gun, so let's select this object, shift select this object. I'm going to go to frame 70, and I want to rotate this up a little bit, and then I'm going to go back to frame 40, and I'm going to rotate the guns down a little bit, so something like that. Maybe also rotate the guns over just a little bit to the side. Now, if you select the body object, you can see that 90 is the next keyframe, and at frame 90, he's just kind of moving up a bit. And so I actually want to move these like arm pieces down as he moves up. So I'm going to select this piece here, press R to rotate that down, select this piece here, R to rotate that down. Then I can select this piece here, and I'm going to rotate this a bit more forward so it's kind of still pointing down, and also rotate this down as well. And now that he's not moving around so much, I'm going to select this piece right here, and I can press Alt R and select this one here and press Alt R. So now he just kind of is hovering, and his arms just kind of rotate down a bit. Now you can see on these objects right here, we didn't actually add any keyframes. So when I put a keyframe at frame 90, that's now the keyframe for the entire animation. So what I'm going to do is go back to frame 70 and then select this object here, and I can press Alt R, and then select this object here and press Alt R. So now his arms are kind of higher up, and then he kind of rotates them down. So you can see he rotates them down as he comes up. So let's select the body object, and you can see frame 110 is the next one. So I'm going to go over here, and at this point I want the arms to be kind of rotating back up a bit. I'm going to select the object, rotate that up a bit, select this object, rotate that up a bit. Now because he's rotating over, I want the fans to be rotating in separate directions, and that way it's going to push the air and make him look like he's actually rotating. It's going to look more realistic. So you can see as he rotates over at frame 110, I need to select this object here, and I need to rotate this object so that the fan is pointed down forwards, because as he rotates this way, this side of his body needs to be pushed back, and then this side of his body needs to be pushed forward. So at frame 110, I'm going to select the other side, and I'm going to rotate this forward a bit. So this way, he kind of rotates this, so this one's going back and this one's going forward, and that looks much more realistic so that it can actually rotate. And then also select this piece right here, press Alt R to clear the rotation, and I actually want to rotate that back just a little bit so it's a bit more straight. Select this piece here, and I can press Alt R to clear the rotations, and maybe rotate that down just a little bit. So I'm now going to move to frame 145, and at frame 145 I want his arms here and the rotor blades to be rotated back to the defaults. So I'm going to select this object, hold down the shift key, select this object, and this object here, and this object, and then also this object here, and also this one here. So these three over here, and these three over here. So I can now press Alt R, and Alt R will clear the rotation values. So now he rotates over, and then he kind of rotates up, and the blades move back to the default position. So I'm now going to go to frame 170, and I just want to give him a little bit more variation in his movement. So I'm going to rotate this over a bit on the Z-axis. I'm also going to shift select both of the blasters and kind of rotate these down a bit on frame 170, and then I might just go back to frame 140 and just kind of rotate them back up. So I will just press Alt R to clear the rotation. So now those just kind of rotate down a bit to make him look like he's a bit more relaxed right before he kind of swivels around. And then also at frame 170, I think I will bring these up a little bit. So I'm going to select this piece, rotate it up a little bit, and select this piece. And I actually think I'll rotate this one down a little bit because he's kind of rotated to the side a bit. All right, there we go. So I can now just scrub through this or play it. You can see he's just kind of looking around. Let's press Control S again to save. So I'm now going to go to frame 185, and at frame 185 he's moving around really quickly. And so again, to rotate around, I'm going to need to rotate these so that that can actually change his direction. So on this side here, this side is rotating forward. So if I select this object, I need to rotate this forward, so it's going to push the air and then rotate this side of his body. And then this side over here on frame 185 is going to be the opposite. So select this piece here, and I'm going to rotate this back, and I'm going to rotate it a lot because he is rotating pretty quickly. So the rotor blades are going to push the air down this way, so this side of the robot will rotate back, and then this side will rotate forward. So if I go back here and then play this, you can see that looks much more realistic now. Now as I play through this, you can see the fans are already starting to rotate over here at like 150. So if I select the body object again, I'm going to go to frame 170, and I just want to clear the rotations. So select this object here, I can press Alt R, and then also select this object here, and I can press Alt R. So now those blades won't rotate until after frame 170. So now I can play through this. I'm actually going to go into the camera view and see how that's looking. So that's looking good, but then I also need the blades to be kind of rotating back to the default once he's rotated over. So I'm going to go to frame 200 here on the timeline, and then again select this object and press Alt R, and then select this object here and press Alt R. So I can press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view and play through this. I'm actually just going to go back to the starting and see how this looks. So he kind of flies in, and then those blades are kind of rotating. Okay, that looks good. And then he rotates over, and then they kind of rotate back. Now as he starts to fly forward, I want those blades to both be pointed forward, so they're grabbing the air and pushing it back. So if I select the body object, you can see at frame 250, that's when he starts to move forward. So I'm going to navigate right over here, and I'm going to select this piece right here, kind of rotate it over a bit, and then select this piece right here and rotate that forward a bit, just like that. So now those two blades are rotated forward. But then what I want to do is just go back to frame 240 and clear the rotations. So at frame 240, I can press Alt R, select this object, and press Alt R. So now those blades just kind of rotate forward before he starts to fly over. Now if I play through this, you can see the rotor blades rotate really quickly, and I don't want them to just rotate that quickly. So I'm actually going to hold down the Shift key and select both of these objects. And then in the timeline, I'm going to press the A key to deselect the keyframes. Then I can press B for the box select and just drag a box around this keyframe here, and I can press G to grab, and I can move it over to like maybe 275. So now you can see that it kind of rotates a bit slower, and so as he starts to move, it rotates more and more. So I think that is a lot better. Alright, so I'm going to save this again, and then I want to now make the animation more smooth, because now that we've blocked out the main poses, I want to see how it looks like when it is more smooth, and then we can add more details to the animation and kind of tweak some things and make it look really nice. So I'm going to press the A key to select all of the objects, and then right here in the timeline, press the A key to make sure all the keyframes are selected. I can now press the T key, and that's going to bring up the keyframe interpolation, and I'm going to use the BZA because the BZA is going to be much more smooth. So now let's just go into the camera view, press the A key to deselect, and I'm just going to play through this and see how it looks. So he kind of flies over, and then it kind of stops, kind of rotates over, looks around, rotates back, and then shoots, and then kind of flies away. So this is already looking pretty good, but there definitely are a few things that I want to tweak with the timing and a few other things. So one thing is that I want the robot to be a bit farther back. So if I go to frame 0, I can select the body object. I'm going to press 7 on the numpad for top view, and I want to actually rotate this over a bit so he doesn't rotate quite as much, and then bring it back a little bit. Alright, and then because we were on frame 0 and because the auto key is on, it's automatically going to add a keyframe. So that looks a bit better. I kind of like how he's a bit farther away and then he kind of flies into the scene. So let's play through this. So you can see he kind of rotates up a little bit, and I don't really like that. So I'm going to scrub the timeline to frame 40, and I'm going to bring it down a bit on the Z-axis, and maybe also rotate this over on the Y-axis a little bit so he's kind of rotated over a bit. And I could also bring it back on the X-axis. So now we'll just play through this. Kind of see how that looks. That is a bit better. Now if I play through this again, you can see that he just kind of slows down and stops here, but I want him to kind of rotate a bit more this way before coming back, just to kind of counteract that rotation. So what I'm going to do is go to frame 60, and then I'm going to rotate this on the y-axis and kind of rotate it the other way. So he kind of rotates over, then he quickly kind of rotates back, and then he becomes more straight. So you can see that looks a lot more realistic, because he would need to rotate a bit more over to this side before coming back, just to kind of counteract that rotation. Although I do think that's a bit too much, so I think I will rotate this on the y-axis on frame 60, maybe rotate that back a little bit. So now I can play through this. You can see he kind of rotates over, and then he just kind of comes to a stop there. Now, as I play through this, you can see that he kind of comes to a stop here, and then pretty quickly comes up and moves to the side. So I want to just kind of stretch out this whole area and make it a little bit longer so that it is a bit slower. So I'm going to press the A key a few times to make sure everything is selected so that we can move all the keyframes at once. Then I'm going to press the A key to deselect everything. Then I'll press B for the box select. And I'm just going to box select the keyframes here on frame 90 and 110. So I want to move this out so it's a bit slower. So I'll press G to grab. And I'm just going to move the one from 90 to 100. So now it's a little bit slower. And then you can see he moves around quite fast here. So what I'm actually going to do is press the A key to deselect everything, B for the box select, and just box select the keyframe here. And I'll move this from frame 120 to frame 130, just so it's a little bit slower. So I do like that timing a little bit better. And then also I'm going to press B for the box select and box select all the keyframes at 70. And I'll press G to grab and move that over to 80. So now if I play through this, he kind of slows down a little bit slower as well. I think that looks a bit better. So you can just continue to play around with the timing of the keyframes to kind of get the animation to the time that you like. Like for instance, right over here, I can see that frame 140 to frame 45 is a little bit fast. So I'm going to box select all the keyframes at frame 145, and I'm going to move this over to frame 150. So now if I play through this, it's just a little bit slower and a little bit more smooth, and I think I do like that better. Now if I select the body object, I'm going to go here to the end and kind of scrub through this, and you can see that he starts to move off quite fast, and so I want to also kind of make this a bit more smooth. With the body selected, just box select the keyframes at 250, and I'm going to move this back to frame 245. That's a little bit better. Maybe also move it back to frame 240, something like that. Let's move it back maybe into the middle here. So I'm going to move it to about here in between 240 and 245, and I think that is a bit better. There we go. So I really like how that is. So I'll just play through this one more time, just kind of look over it and make sure I like how the timing is. So now I want to go back through here and animate the guns, because right now the guns aren't really looking around. I want to make the guns kind of swivel back and forth and kind of look around as he looks around. So I'm going to select this gun here, hold down the shift key, select this one here, and I'm going to move back to the starting here, and then I'll press period on the numpad to kind of zoom into it. So I first want to rotate the guns over a little bit like this, and I'll just do that at frame 17, and then as he kind of flies over here, let's go to frame 40, and at frame 40 I can press period on the numpad to zoom into these, and I want to rotate them over a little bit this way because he's kind of rotating over, so these would kind of rotate over to the side. All right, and then let's go over to frame 180, see how that looks. So I think at frame 80 I want the guns to be just kind of back at their default position. So at frame 80 I can press Alt R to clear the rotations. All right, that is good. And then you can see as he moves up, it would make sense that the guns would kind of just rotate down a little bit as he moves up. So I'm going to go here to the side view, and at frame 100 I'm just going to rotate this down a little bit, just like that. So now it kind of rotates up and the guns just kind of go down. So now I'm going to move over to when he swivels around very quickly, and I want the guns to be kind of pointed over because he's kind of looking for an intruder. So I'm going to move over to frame 185, and at frame 185 I'm going to double tap the R key, and I'm going to rotate these together, and I'm going to rotate them over this way, and then I can kind of play back at that. So now he kind of rotates over and the guns kind of move over first, maybe rotate that even farther, and then as he rotates back over, I want the guns to be pointed forwards. So let's go to frame 200, and I can press 7 for top view, and then I can rotate that back so that the guns are pointed where he's rotating. And also maybe rotate that down just a little bit. I could also just press Alt R to clear the rotations. That's a bit better. So it's pointed forwards. So go back here and just play through this. So he kind of moves over, and then quickly the guns swivel over first and then just kind of rotate back. Now you can see it's a little bit awkward here because the guns are kind of still rotated over to the side. So I think I'll go to 185 and I'll rotate these on the Z-axis so they're not quite as far, and that might look just a little bit better. And of course you want to look at this in the camera view because the camera view is where we're going to see the animation. Now if I go back over here to like frame 120 to frame 180, in this area he's just kind of looking around, so I just want the guns to kind of rotate around, kind of like he's just scanning the area. So I'm going to go to frame 160 and then I will rotate the guns on the Z-axis and just kind of rotate them a bit that way. So now I can play through this and he just kind of goes around and the guns will just kind of move a little bit as he's kind of looking around. So that looks a bit better. Just adding in all those little details to make the animation feel much more realistic and make the drone feel more alive. Now there is one really important thing we haven't animated yet, and that is the rotor blades. So let's do that. So I'm going to select this object and then hold down the shift key and select this object, and I'm going to go to frame 0 and I can press the period on the numpad. So I just want to press R to rotate and then just click right there, and that's going to add a keyframe right there on frame 0. I'm now going to scrub the timeline over to the very end at frame 300, and I can press period on the numpad to zoom into the objects. Then I want to hit R to rotate, but instead of like manually rotating it, I'm going to type in a giant number. So I'm going to type in like 100,000. So 100,000 and enter. And then I added a keyframe there because we have the auto key on. So now I can play through this and you can see the rotor blades are moving. Now I want the rotor blades to be moving at a consistent speed the whole way through the animation. So press the A key to make sure both of these keyframes are selected, and I'm going to press the T key and I can click on linear. This way they aren't going to speed up and then slow back down. They're going to be playing at a consistent speed. So that is looking good. Now actually if you look right up here at the rotor blade and play this, it actually looks like it's hardly moving, and that's just because it's moving around so many times, it's moving around so fast that it almost appears as though it's not rotating. Now there is going to be motion blur when we actually render this, so that will help, but we can also just move the very end keyframe here to make it look like it's moving around more. So I'm going to press the A key in the timeline to deselect the keyframes, and then I can press B for the box select, and I'm just going to box select this keyframe here. And then if I press the space bar, I can play the timeline, and I'm just going to press G to grab and I can move this keyframe around. So now let me just play through this, and you can kind of see if I drag the keyframe around, now it looks like it's actually rotating. So you can just kind of play around with this until it looks like it's rotating pretty fast. But with the motion blur in the actual render, it'll look like it's moving around much faster because the rotor blades are going to be blurred. All right, now another thing that we need to animate is the blaster bolts coming from the gun. And we haven't actually made an object yet for the bolts, so let's do that. So I'm first going to click right here to turn off the auto key because I don't want Blender to make keyframes. And now I'm just going to create a basic bolt object. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift C. That's going to center the 3D cursor in the center of our scene. And I can press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here and add a cylinder. And then I'm going to press R to rotate. I'm going to rotate this on the x-axis by 90 degrees and enter. And then I can scale this down, just make it much smaller. Then I can press period on the numpad to zoom into it. And then I can press the tab key to go into edit mode and make sure you're in the face select, and I'm just going to select this face. So I can now press G to grab, and let's bring this back on the y-axis and make it pretty far, and then press S to scale and just scale it down really small. So this is going to be the back of the blaster bolt. Then I can select this here, and I can press S to scale it down, and then I want to make this kind of have a rounded front, so I'm going to press E to extrude, and then S to scale, E to extrude, and S to scale, E to extrude, and S to scale. Scale that way down, make it really small. So there we go. I'm just going to tab to go back to object mode, and that is basically it. So I'm just going to make a very simple bolt just like that. And then using the object context menu, I can shade this smooth. So that is really it, although I do really quick just want to make a material for this. So I'm going to click right over here to go to the shading tab, and with the object selected, I can click on new here to make a new material, and I can just call this like bullet. And then I can hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view. And then if I open up the side panel here and go to the material properties, I can click on the surface, and I'm going to change this to the emission so that it is actually emitting light. And then I actually want to use the shader editor here because we are going to blend between an emission and a transparency. So on the emission here, I'm going to turn the strength up really high to like 100, so it's very bright. And then on the color here, I'm going to click on this and make this a very strong red color. And then I can scale this down a bit more and maybe even scale it up on the y-axis a bit, just like that. Now I don't want to be able to see the blaster bolt until he actually shoots it. So I'm going to also add a transparency, and then we are going to animate the value to mix between the emission and the transparency. So we'll have the bullet be transparent, but then when he shoots, it's going to be the emission, and then it will be transparent again when you can't see it. So here in the shader editor, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the transparent shader. We're going to put this down here. And then I want to mix these together, so I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a mix shader, and let's put the mix shader right here, and then we want the emission to be going into the first one and the transparent to be going into the bottom one. So I can now drag the factor. If I drag it to 0, it's going to be using the emission, and if I drag it to 1, it's going to be using the transparency. Now you can see it's not actually transparent, it looks black, and that's because we need to turn on a setting for Eevee to use the transparency. So right over here on the material properties, if you open up the setting here, this blend mode right here, I'm going to click on the opaque, and I'm going to change this to alpha clip. And so now you can see that it is transparent, and I can drag this value. So at 0, it's going to be the emission, and then if I drag it to 1, it'll be transparent. So we can now just animate this value when it is shooting. So let's first turn it to 0 so we can actually see the bolt, and I'm going to go back to the layout now. And then I'm going to navigate over here, and I want to move the timeline till right when he shoots. So you can see right here at frame 228, that's when he's just about to shoot. I'm actually going to go to frame 227. Then what I want to do is put the bolt inside the gun. So I'm going to press G to grab, bring this over, and bring it over here. I can rotate this on the Z-axis, kind of rotate that over, and we're just going to stick it inside the gun there, and just kind of stick it in, maybe even scale it down a bit, something like that. Maybe scale that down a bit more so it actually fits. Hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view, just because I want to make sure that you can't see the bolt there. Alright, so I now want to duplicate this bolt and put it over here. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and let's stick the next one here inside the gun, and also bring it back a little bit and rotate it over. Alright, there we go. So I now want to hold down the Z button and go into wireframe, and I want to zoom over here, and I want to hold down the Shift key and select this bolt. So we now have both of these selected. So I want to add a keyframe here to actually place a keyframe. So I'm going to click right here to turn on the auto key, and then I can press G to grab, and then just click to place it there. And you can see it's going to add a keyframe. So I am now going to move over 6 frames. So to do this, I'm just going to click with my arrow keys. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now that I've moved over 6 frames, I want to kind of move over here to the side, and I'm going to press G to grab and just move this way over, just bring these way over, kind of out of the scene. And if I press 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, I want to make sure those are out of the scene, so just over there. So I can hold down the Z button, go back to solid view. Actually, I want to see this in the rendered view, so I'm going to hold down the Z button and go to the rendered view. And then I can just play through this, and you can see that it shoots. Now, of course, right here, you can still see the bolts, and I want the bolts to be invisible. So in a moment, we are going to be animating the transparency. For now, though, I think I actually want to slow down those bolts because that's super fast. So what I can do is press the A key to deselect the keyframes, press B for the box select, and then box select this keyframe here, press G to grab, and just move it over. So now I can play through this, and you can see the bolts are a bit slower. That's pretty good. I like that speed. Alright, so I now need to animate the transparency. So let's go back over here to the shading tab, and I'm going to press 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. And then I actually need some sort of timeline here so I can scrub through this. So I'm going to click right up here when the crosshair appears, click, and then drag down. That is going to split the window. And then if I scroll my mouse wheel, I can bring this over, and I'm going to click right here to change the editor type, and I'm going to change this to the timeline. And then I'm going to click and drag, make this smaller, and also make this smaller as well. And then also right here, I just want to bring this over to make the timeline bigger. So when that crosshair appears, I can click, drag over, and then let go, and that's going to make the timeline bigger. All right, so I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm now going to go to frame 226. So this is one keyframe before it moves. So I want to make the bolts fully transparent at this point. So I'm going to turn the factor all the way to 1, and then with your mouse hovered over the factor value, you can press the I key. That's going to insert a keyframe here on that factor value, and you can see the keyframe right there. So I now want the bolts to be visible one frame after. So at frame 227, I'm going to turn the factor to 0, and then because we have the auto key on, it's automatically going to add a keyframe. So I can now scrub through the timeline and I can see the bolts there, so the bolts are shooting out of the gun. And then I want to add another keyframe right about here when the bolts are kind of out of the camera view. So hover your mouse over the factor value and press the I key to insert a keyframe. Then I'm going to click with the arrow key to move one frame over. I can turn the factor all the way back to 1 so it's transparent, and then because the auto key was on, it automatically added a keyframe. So I can go back to the layout here and just play through this, and you can see the bolt is transparent, and then it just shoots, and then it becomes transparent again. Now there is one little thing that I want to change to the animation. If I play through this, you can see the bolts look like they're not actually shooting out of the gun. So what I want to do is just make the gun not kick back until a few frames later. So I'm going to select this gun, shift select this gun, and I'm going to zoom in here, and you can see these are the frames where the gun kicks back. So I'm going to press B for the box select, and just box select these two keyframes here, and then I want the gun to start kicking back probably about here, so I can press G to grab and just move that over like 2 frames, and then I can play through this. So that is better. Now it actually looks like it shoots and then the guns kick back. So I'll play through this, and that looks a lot better. Now I do also want to animate the color values of the drone's lights, so let's do that. So I'm just going to select one of the objects here which have the light, and then let's go over here to the shading tab. And then if I scroll right up here, I want to select the light color, and I can zoom in here and we can just animate this color value. So I'm going to move the timeline over until he's over here. So I want to go over to frame 270, and at frame 270 I want it to turn red. So what I'm going to do is hover my mouse over the emission color, and I can press the I key. That is going to insert a keyframe on the color value. And then I can use the arrow keys to go one frame back, and I'm now going to change this to a blue color. So I can click on the color here, and I'm going to make this a pretty saturated blue color and very bright. So something like that. And then with your mouse hovered over the value, just press the I key to make sure it inserts a keyframe there. So now if I play through the timeline, you can see it's actually blue, and then right at frame 270, it turns red as he detects like an intruder or something. One thing that I also want to animate is the camera. So I want to give the camera just a little bit of noise to make the camera just move around and almost make the camera look like it's handheld. So what I'm going to do is go right up here to the outliner, and I'm going to click on this to turn on the lights and camera collection. And then I can play through this to see how it's looking. So now what I want to do is just click right up here to select the camera, and I need to add one keyframe to the camera. So I'm going to go to frame 0, and then I'm going to press G to grab, and then just click right there, and that's going to add a keyframe. So now that we have one keyframe there, we can add some noise to the animation. So to do this, I'm going to move my mouse right up here when the crosshair appears in the corner and click and drag over, and that's going to split the window. And then in this new window, I'm going to scroll over here, and I'm going to click here to change the editor type, and I'm going to change this to the graph editor. And then I'm going to make this a bit smaller, and if I click right over here, I can go to the modifiers, and I can actually add modifiers to the keyframes. Now, if I click right over here to open this up, you can see that the camera has location values, rotation values, and scale values. So I'm going to first click on the X location just to select it. So I now want to click on add modifier to add a modifier to that keyframe, and I want to click on noise. So now if I press the spacebar to play, you can see the camera has some noise, and so the noise is animating the X location. Now this is way too noisy, so I want to first turn the scale up and make the scale really big. And I am going to use a scale value of 60. Now it still is a bit too strong, the strength is a bit too strong, so on the strength here, I'm going to change this down to like a 0.6. So it should be pretty subtle, but you can see the camera's moving a little bit. So I pretty much want to do the same thing for a bunch more of these values. So I'm going to click on the Y location next. Let's click on add modifier, and I can choose noise. And then the scale here, I'm going to turn this to 60. I think that's pretty good. And the strength I will turn to 0.6, but you can of course play around with these values. And then I will click on the Z location. Let's click on add modifier, and I can add noise again. And again, the scale I'm going to turn to 60, and the strength I'm going to turn to 0.6. So now the camera just is moving around a little bit, and it looks a little bit more handheld. I want to do the same thing for the rotations. So let's click here on this X rotation. So I'm going to click on add modifier and add a noise, and let's turn the scale up. And I will turn the scale to like a 60, but I wanted the strength to be much smaller because you can see that strength is really strong. So I'm going to turn the strength way down to like a 0.04. So now it is rotating, but very subtle. So let's click on the Y rotation, add modifier. I'm going to add noise, and let's change this again to like a 60, and the strength here to like a 0.04. And then one more here on the Z rotation. Let's add the noise, and then I will turn the scale to like 60 and the strength here to like a 0.04. All right, so I can play through this, and you can see the camera's just moving around a little bit, and it looks more natural and kind of handheld. So I can now click and drag right here, and then drag over, and then let go to close the graph editor. Now, if you want to, you could also add a few keyframes to the camera. So I'm going to go over about to the end here, and I'm going to double tap the R key and just kind of rotate the camera up just a little bit, so the camera kind of looks up a little bit as the drone flies away. And then also kind of right over here, I can double tap the R key, kind of rotate this over to kind of make the camera so it kind of follows the drone. So it will still be using the noise, but it will just be moving a little bit. And then right here, maybe on frame 200, double tap the R key, and I'm going to hold down the shift key to make my movement more sensitive and bring that over. And then maybe right over here, double tap the R key again, kind of bring this up a little bit, just so that the camera moves along with the robot a bit. And then right here when the robot's flying in, maybe double tap the R key and bring this over a little bit. Now, another thing that I want to add is a depth of field, because I want the background to be blurry, but then I want you to focus on the robot. So just click right up here to select the camera, and I'm going to click right here on the object data properties of the camera. Now on this focus object right here, I can click on the eyedropper, and I want to select the eye object. And then I can change the f-stop to make it more blurry. So let's just start with a value of 1, see how that looks. And I also want to get that grid out of the way because I don't really want the grid. So I'm going to click here on the overlays, and I can turn off the floor and turn off the X and Y just to get the grid out of the viewport. All right, that's looking pretty good, and the buildings definitely look blurry. Maybe I'll just go with like a 0.8. I think that is pretty good. All right, so press Control S again to save, and we are now ready to render this out to images. So let's click right up here to go to the output properties, and here on the output, I want to click on this file icon here to set an output. And then in the folder with my tutorial files, I'm going to click on the plus here to create a new folder, and I'm just going to rename this folder to frames. Then I can go inside the frames and then click on accept. And then right here in the file format, you could use PNG, but I'm going to use JPEG just so that the file size is a bit smaller of all the images, and I'm also going to turn the quality to 100. Now, I get a lot of questions in the comments of some of my videos, and people are wondering why you shouldn't just render this out to an FFmpeg video. But it's actually very important to render your frames first to images. And why it's very important is because if Blender crashes or your computer shuts down or crashes, then the file is going to become corrupt if you are rendering out to a video file. So if for some reason the animation stops before it finishes rendering all the frames, the file will become corrupt. However, if you render this out to images, then if for some reason you have to pause the animation, or maybe you see something that you want to change and you just want to go back and render some certain frames, or maybe Blender crashes or your computer crashes or something like that, you'll still have each individual rendered frame. And it's easy enough just to compile them together into Blender's video editor or another video editor. So I'm going to set this to JPEG, but you could also use PNG. So just press Control S to save the Blender file, and then to render the animation, you can press Control F12 or click on Render, and then you can click on Render Animation, and the animation finished. So I'm just going to press Control S to save this Blender file, and then I'm going to add a new video editing file. So I'm going to click on File, let's go here to New, and then I can go down here and add Video Editing. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here and add image/sequence. And then you can just locate to the folder where you saved all the frames and press the A key to select all the frames. Now I need to click right up here to change the display settings, and I want to click on reverse sorting, because if we don't click on reverse sorting, then the animation will actually play backwards. So make sure you turn that on, and then I can click on add image strip. And then I can press the space bar to play, and we can watch the animation. And then the animation is a total of 300 frames. So right down here on the end, let's just change this to 300. So now let's add the sound effects. Now the sound effects that I'm going to be using are all free sound effects from a website called freesound.org, and I'll have a link in the description to all the sound effects that I'm going to use. And I talked about those sound effects at the beginning of the tutorial series. So links in the description if you'd like to download them. So the first sound effect that I'm going to add in is the big city. So I'm going to click and drag from my file browser and just drop it in here. And then I can also click on the display waveform right over here, and that'll preview the waveform. And I can press G to grab and just move this over, and then I can play through this. Now I want this big city sound effect to be much quieter and just kind of in the background. So I'm going to turn the volume here to just like a 0.3, so it is much quieter. And you can press G to grab and kind of move this around and then play through it and get it to a sound that you like. Alright, so I'm now going to add the laser shot. So I'm going to click and drag and drop the laser shot sound effect in. And then I can click on the display waveform to actually see that. And then I do want to make this a bit quieter, so let's turn the volume to just like a 0.7. So now I can play through this. So just hit the space bar to play, and then I just need to align this up. So just select the sound effect and press G to grab and kind of move this over. I think I'll actually bring it down here and then just play through. And you can actually click with the arrow keys just to align it up. So I want to move it over so it starts about there. And then I want to have two of them. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, bring one up, and then I'm going to bring it over one frame over so that they're just slightly offset. And now that actually sounds like he's shooting two of the bolts. So I now want to add the helicopter sound. So I'm going to drag and drop in the helicopter sound effect. And then I can click on display waveform. And then I want to make this one more quiet. So I'm going to turn the volume down to like a 0.36. So it's a bit quieter. And then I can play through this, and I can press G to grab, kind of move this over. And then you can see it kind of ends here. It's actually not very long. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to put another one right up here. And then you can see if I click with my middle mouse wheel and try to move up and down, I can't move up and down. And that's because I need to click right here on view. And then I need to click on the limit view to contents. So now I can click with my middle mouse wheel and I can move that up. I can also hold down the control key and then click with my middle mouse wheel to change the size. And I might bring this up so I can just see more of that. So I'll press G to grab, and I'm going to move this sound effect over and just match it up so that I can always hear like the helicopter blades. So that sounds much better. So I now want to add another sound effect of the helicopter flight recorded from inside. So I'm going to click and drag from my file browser and drop that one in there. And then I can press G to grab and move it over. And I'm also going to click on the display waveform. And this one I do want to be quite a bit quieter. So on the volume, I'm going to turn this to a 0.17. So it is much quieter. And then I'm going to scroll with my scroll wheel to zoom way out. And I'm going to press G to grab, and I'm going to move this over because I like how it sounds, how the sound effect sounds kind of more at the end. So I'll play through this. That sounds a bit better. Now I want to animate the speed of this sound effect to make the rotor blades sound like they're going faster or slower. So you can click right here to open up this time. And if I scroll down here, I can change this speed factor. So I'm actually going to animate the speed factor, because if I turn the speed factor up, it sounds like the rotor blades are spinning faster. But then if I turn this down to like a 0.5, it sounds like it's moving slower. So I'm going to animate the speed value. So I'm going to start by turning this speed factor to a 1.1, and then hover your mouse over the speed factor and press the I key to add a keyframe. And then something I also forgot to do is save the Blender file. So let's do that. So I'm just going to click on File, and I will click on Save As. And I'm just going to save this as videoediting.blend, and I can click on Save As. All right, so now I'm going to play this, and I'm going to move this over, and then I want to add another keyframe about here. So this is going to be just when the robot is flying in. So hover your mouse over the speed factor and press the I key. So I now want to bring this over, and I want to make the rotor blades sound like it's slowing down a bit, kind of over here when the robot is just kind of sitting here. So I'm going to turn the speed factor maybe to like a 0.8. and then I can press the I key to add a keyframe there. And then right over here, when the robot is turning, I want it to speed up a bit. So I'm going to change the speed factor to like 1, and then press the I key with your mouse hovered over that. And then right before the robot turns, I want to add another keyframe, but I think I might just turn this up to like a 1.1, so it's a little bit faster, and then press the I key again to add another keyframe. Now, as the robot spins over, I want it to spin up faster, so I want the speed factor to be faster. So right over here, when the robot turns around, I'm going to turn the speed factor to like a 1.4, and then press the I key to add another keyframe. So I can play through this, and it sounds like the rotor blades are spinning up a lot faster. And then right over here, right before he starts to fly away, it can get a bit smaller, or it can go a bit slower. So I'm going to turn the speed factor to just like a 1.1 again, right here after he shoots, and then press the I key to add another keyframe there. And then as the robot is flying away, I want the rotor blade to spin up a lot faster. So kind of right here, when the robot is kind of going out of the view, I can turn up the speed factor to like a 1.4 again, so it's spinning faster, and press the I key again. And then it gets really fast, gets a little bit slower, and then as he flies away, it gets a bit louder, or it goes a bit faster. All right, now I also want to add the alarm alert sound. So I'm going to click and drag in this sound effect here. And then right here, I can click on the display waveform. And then I want this to be a bit quieter. So let's turn the volume to just like 8.7. And then I can press G to grab and move this over. And then I can play through this. And I just want that alarm to happen right when the robot lights turn red. So bring this over, play that. So the robot's lights turn red right here, so I'll bring this over, and then I just want to use 2 of them. Once it's had 2 of those alarms right here with that sound effect selected, I'm going to click right here to select the handle, and I can press G to grab, and I can move this back just to get rid of that end spot. So just put it right there. So now we can only hear 2 of them. And then as the robot is flying away, I want to have the same sound effect. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate. I'm going to put this here and then play through that. So now the robot is making the alarm sound as he flies away. Now as he flies away, it should get a little bit quieter. So I'm going to go here to the starting of this one, hover your mouse over the volume and press the I key to add a keyframe. Then I'm going to scrub over to the end here, and I'm going to turn the volume much smaller to like a 0.4, and then hover your mouse over the volume and press the I key again. So now as I play through this, it'll sound like the robot is getting farther away. And then I want to do that for these helicopter sounds as well. So I'm going to select this helicopter flight sound, hover your mouse over the volume here when the robot is just right here, and press the I key to add a keyframe. And then I want the robot sound to get quieter as it goes away. So I'm going to turn the volume at the end to just like a 0.1, and then press the I key again to add another keyframe. And then let's do that for this helicopter sound as well. So go right over here when the robot is still in the scene, press the I key with your mouse over the volume, and then let's scrub over to the very end, and I'm going to turn this much smaller to just like a 0.1, and then press the I key again to add another keyframe. So let's just play through this and hear what it sounds like. So it starts to get quieter as the drone flies away. And then there is just one more sound effect that I want to add, and that is the robot high pitch sound. So I'm going to drag and drop that in there, and then I can click on display waveform. And then I will make this a bit quieter, so I'll just make it like a 0.8. So it's a little bit quieter. And I'll press G to grab and move it over here. And I want the robot to start talking once it's flown up. So just scrub through the timeline, and then once it kind of ends about here, I can press G to grab, move this over, and then I can play through this. Now, I actually want the robot sounds to be much lower pitched. So I'm actually going to turn down the time here. So I'm going to turn the speed factor down to like a 0.3, and that way the robot sounds are going to be lower pitched. So I can just play through this. And I also need to bring this back a little bit, because when the speed factor is turned down, everything's going to play slower. So I actually need to bring this back a bit farther. So I just need to bring this back because it's playing a bit slower. And then I want the robot sounds to stop around here. So I'm going to first go right about here, and I want to animate the volume. So I'm going to press the I key with my mouse hovered over the volume. Let's go just a little bit over here, and then I can turn the volume all the way to 0, and then with your mouse hovered over the volume, press the I key, and that'll animate it. Now there's just one more thing that I want to add to this, and that is going to be a flash of light when he actually shoots. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here and add adjustment layer. And then the adjustment layer is added down here. I can just leave it down here. So on the adjustment layer, I'm going to add a brightness and contrast. So I'm going to click over here on the modifiers, and I can click on add strip modifier on the adjustment, and I'm going to add bright contrast. So if I turn the brightness up, that is going to make everything brighter. So I'm just going to animate it so that it gets really bright right when the bolts shoot. So you can just click with the arrow keys right when the bolt is shooting, and I'm going to turn the brightness value here on the bright contrast to 20, so it's a bit brighter. Then hover your mouse over the brightness value and press the I key to add a keyframe. And then I'm going to click with the arrow key to go 1 frame back, and then I want to take the brightness and I want to type in 0, and then I want to add another keyframe here, so press the I key with your mouse hovered over the brightness. Then I'm going to click with my arrow keys, and I'm going to go to where the brightness is at 20, and then I'm going to click 2 more times to go 2 frames over with the arrow keys. And I want to turn the brightness back to 0. So click on the brightness value, I'm going to type in 0 and enter, and then press the I key to add a keyframe. So now if I play through this, you can see that everything is just lighting up, and that looks really cool. So it actually looks more powerful of a bolt. All right, and that is it. So it is now finished. So we can just render this out now to a final video. So I'm gonna go right up here to the output properties, and I'm gonna scroll down, and I'm first gonna click right here to set an output. And I'm just going to save this in the folder with my other files, and then I can just click on accept. And then actually I didn't set a name for this, so I can click right here on the folder again, and right here on the name I can just type in final animation, and click on accept. Now if I scroll down here on the file format, I'm going to use FFmpeg video, and then I'm going to scroll down here and open up the encoding. I'm going to use a container of MPEG-4, so it's going to be a .mp4 file. And then here on the video, I'm going to use H.264, and I'll set this to medium quality and good. And then here on the audio, I'm going to use an audio codec of AAC. So now that I've set up all those settings, I'm going to press Ctrl S to save, and then to render out the final animation, I can press Ctrl F12, and it'll render out the final animation to a video file. And with that finished, this is it for the Sci-Fi Security Drone tutorial series. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial series. And if you made it through the entire tutorial series, definitely let me know in the comments. And if you post your final animation on YouTube and you'd like to share it with me, you can definitely let me know in the comments, and I'll check out your channel and check out the animation. And if you'd like to learn how to create more robots in Blender, then I actually have 3 other robot tutorial series. So I have this tutorial series on how to create this sci-fi robot drone, and then I also have this other tutorial series on how to create this sci-fi worker robot, and then I also have this other tutorial series on how to create this sci-fi robot mech. I'll have the links in the description to all of those tutorial series, and they're all completely free on my YouTube channel, and just like this tutorial series, they are all step-by-step in real time. And if you enjoyed this tutorial series and you'd like to help support me and this channel, then I will also have links in the description to my Gumroad store and my Patreon and the YouTube memberships. Those are all really great ways to help support me and this channel. And if you enjoyed this tutorial and you'd like to give me a little tip, you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube to give me a little tip and show your support. And I do appreciate all of your support. And you can also purchase the finished tutorial files for this tutorial series, so the link's in the description to that as well. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial series, and I hope to see you in a future tutorial.